Welcome, beautiful souls, to Her True Stories, a space created just for women like you, where real stories meet strength, resilience, and healing. Whether you come here carrying fresh wounds or scars from long ago, I want you to know this channel is your safe corner of the internet. Every story we tell here is more than entertainment. It's a reminder that you are not alone, that your voice matters, and that even the hardest chapters of your life can be rewritten with courage and grace. If you've ever been told you're too old to start over, let me tell you, that's a lie. Your story isn't over, and you still have chapters left to write. Our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain, is filled with simple, powerful steps to help you heal, rebuild, and fall in love with life again. Click the link in the description box and start your new beginning today. So grab a cup of tea, take a deep breath, and settle in. You're in the right place. At Her True Stories, we don't just tell stories, we tell your stories, the ones that remind us that no matter what has been lost, peace, strength, and even joy can be found again. They say a wedding is supposed to be a joining of families. I learned that day that it can just as easily be the dividing line that severs one forever. I had chosen my dress carefully. Not flashy, not desperate. Dignity doesn't scream for attention. A soft dove gray column gown, pearls I'd bought for myself when I closed my first billion-dollar deal, and a silk shawl the color of champagne. My hair swept into a chignon, not because I wanted to look younger, but because I refused to let age dictate style. At 61, I had built a life from boardrooms and balance sheets, not from begging for approval. But that day, my only son's wedding, approval was the currency I never expected to have to spend. The ceremony had been polished and perfect, expensive without being excessive, tasteful without being warm. I had paid attention to every detail, not because I was invited to plan it. I wasn't, but because I know how to read rooms the way others read faces. The flowers were white hydrangeas with pale roses, the linens imported, the champagne labels screaming money for anyone who cared to look. Brielle Cartwright cared. She always did. When the vows were over, when Drew slipped that ring on her slender, manicured finger, when applause broke out and the air filled with camera shutters like machine guns, I smiled. Not for them, not for the crowd. For me. Because I knew how to stand in a storm without bending. I walked forward for the photographs, my heels steady on the stone tiles, and stood where any mother of the groom should. At his side. That's when she turned her face toward me, her white teeth flashing like knives. She didn't even lower her voice. "Can you stand at the back?" she hissed, lips still curled into what she passed off as a smile, "so you don't ruin the wedding photos with your ugly dress and old face?" It was as though the music dropped out of the air. I heard it. I know the bridesmaids heard it. The photographer's hands hesitated, then resumed as though capturing cruelty was part of the package. Drew, my Drew, was laughing with his best man, oblivious.
I could have said something.
God knows I had the vocabulary, the experience, the weight of 61 years, and a reputation that made developers twice my age quake in their imported loafers. But I didn't. I felt my back straighten, felt the sting run across my skin like frost, and then I smiled. A slow, deliberate thing. Not the smile of forgiveness, not the smile of surrender. The smile of a chess player moving a pawn and already knowing the queen will fall. And then I walked. Past the murmurs. Past the bouquet toss rehearsal. Past my son, who still didn't notice. To the table where the gifts lay. There it was. A white lacquered box, ribboned in gold.
Heavy.
Inside, a gift that could have rewritten their lives. The deed to a cottage in Carmel by the Sea, worth more than the dress she was mocking me for. A set of documents transferring ownership of 2 rental parcels outside Austin, 6 units, fully tenanted, steady income. The title to a brand new Range Rover, a ribboned photograph of it tucked inside. And in a sealed brown envelope at the bottom. Proof of what only I knew. Her family's empire was already a paper palace, propped up on loans that I controlled. Their liquidity was a balloon, and I held the needle. I hadn't placed it there out of cruelty. It was insurance. Should they ever need reminding where their stability came from, that was supposed to be their gift. But gifts are not owed. They are gestures. And gestures, once mocked, can be redirected. I picked up the box. Smooth, deliberate. No one stopped me.
No one asked why.
To them, I was just the aging mother retreating with her pride tucked under her arm. At the door, I glanced back once. Brielle was laughing, her white teeth bared, head tipped back like a queen who thought the crown was hers by birthright. I memorized her face, the way the light caught on her diamonds. Not because I wanted to keep the memory, because I wanted to bury it. Outside, the air was softer. Evening was rolling in, the sky bruised lavender and gold. Music carried from another street over, laughter and cheers, the universal soundtrack of a wedding. I should have called a driver, slipped into a car, disappeared. But fate has a way of offering alternatives if you keep your eyes open. I followed the sound. Down one street, past the manicured hedges and valet stands. And there it was, a smaller venue, less ornate, but brighter.
Alive.
A wedding spilling with warmth instead of formality. People dancing barefoot on the grass, children chasing each other, sparklers already in hand. I lingered at the edge, an uninvited guest in pearls and silk. I should have felt out of place. Instead, I felt seen. Because the bride, a woman I recognized faintly, her name came to me like a whisper, Nora Vale, turned, saw me, and gasped. Not in horror, in gratitude. "You're Sloane Ashford," she said, rushing forward, bouquet still in hand. My aunt always told me. She said you created that rent-to-own program that kept her from losing her house. You don't know me, but you changed my family's life." She hugged me before I could answer. Her arms were warm, her dress smelling of roses and rain. Around us, guests smiled, nodded, recognized my name. Not with envy, but with respect. Someone fetched me a chair, someone else a cup of tea. I was treated for the first time that day like I belonged. And I knew, with the clarity of a knife sliding home, where the box in my hand was meant to go. I sat. I smiled. And when the time was right, I placed it carefully on Nora's gift table. Inside, I tucked a note. "On a rainy night, you gave me kindness when I had none. Tonight, I give you a home, a car, and a future. Because kindness is an investment that always pays dividends." When I stood to leave, Nora's eyes were wet, her voice trembling as she thanked me again and again. Guests clapped, toasted. I slipped away quietly, leaving warmth behind me, walking toward the cold work waiting in my future. Because revenge doesn't announce itself. It whispers in boardrooms. It files paperwork at midnight. It waits until the ink is dry, the champagne flat, the plane tickets non-refundable. At my son's wedding, they asked me to stand at the back, so I wouldn't ruin the picture. I walked out of the frame and decided to redraw the whole composition. The weight of that box haunted me as I slipped into the back seat of my car. Not its physical weight. It was no more than 6 or 7 pounds, ribbons tugging at the lacquered sides, the papers inside stacked neat as only my paralegal could arrange them. It was the weight of intention. I had carried it into the wedding with hope, not malice. I had thought, naively perhaps, that giving Brielle something concrete, something irrefutable, would smooth over the sharp edges between us. Maybe she would never love me, maybe she would never even like me, but she would respect me, and I would know I had done everything to give my son's marriage a foundation. Instead, that box had become something else entirely. It had become the ledger where kindness was withdrawn and cruelty accrued. When people see my name, Sloane Ashford, In glossy magazines beside phrases like Queen of Commercial Real Estate or the broker who never loses, they assume I inherited money, that I married it, that I charmed it out of boardrooms with a smile. They're wrong. I was born the daughter of a factory supervisor and a school librarian in Indiana. My first lessons in value were not about money but about scarcity, where a torn coat was patched twice, where light bulbs were unscrewed from one room to be moved to another. I clawed my way into real estate because it was the only field where audacity was rewarded as much as pedigree. I worked 18-hour days, brokered deals in diners at midnight, learned how to outmaneuver men who thought pretty girl meant pushover. By 30, I was making six figures. By 45, seven. At 50, I was named Executive Vice President of Crown and Calder Realty, the largest firm of its kind in America. Now, at 61, my net worth could buy and sell the families of half the women who whispered about my wrinkles. And Brielle knew that, which made her insult cut all the deeper. That box was not just a gesture, it was a strategy. Inside lay three cornerstones. 1. The Carmel Cottage. A white stucco jewel perched above the Pacific, purchased outright for $4.2 million. Not listed, not marketed, acquired privately through a developer who owed me favors. I had envisioned Drew and Brielle sipping coffee on its balcony, the ocean their backyard, their children learning the smell of salt air. Two rental parcels in Austin. 6 doors, all leased, net operating income of $210,000 annually. A tidy passive stream. I had negotiated the parcels years ago at a steep discount during a downturn. Now, their cap rate was the kind of gift that doubled as security. 3. The Range Rover. Pearl white, 2025 model, custom interior. A luxury, yes, but also a symbol. I wanted them to drive into their marriage with pride, not payments. And then, at the very bottom, an envelope. Not intended for immediate eyes, but necessary insurance. Because I am not only a mother, I am an investor. And investors protect their positions. The Cartwrights, Brielle's family, owned Cartwright Holdings, a mid-sized real estate development firm. Glossy ads, splashy projects, cocktail parties in penthouses. From the outside, they looked prosperous. From the inside, I knew the truth. 3 years ago, they had come to me desperate. Overextended, their projects leveraged to the hilt, construction delays bleeding cash. Banks were circling, whispering words like foreclosure and bankruptcy. They needed liquidity. I had it. So I structured a deal. A $35 million revolving bridge line through my family office, callable on 30 days' notice if covenant slipped. An $18 million preferred equity stake, distributions ahead of theirs, giving me voting rights on certain triggers. Vendor financing on 2 parcels via my REIT affiliate. And a master lease on their flagship tower, signed by my firm but written with a keyman and reputation clause. It was clean, legal, and precarious for them. Because while they played empire, I knew they were one quarterly report away from collapse. They had tied their survival to me. I never planned to use that leverage, until Brielle's words sliced through the air like a whip. Ugly dress, old face, stand at the back. What she didn't know was that her family's empire was already standing at the back, behind me. But what made me decide to redirect the gift wasn't just her cruelty. It was memory. 2 months earlier, in March, the sky over Manhattan had cracked open. Sheets of rain, the kind that makes umbrellas laughable. My driver had been late, traffic frozen, and yes, even I, had been stranded, clutching a useless phone beneath a scaffolding awning. Cars hissed by, cabs already filled. My silk blouse clung to me, my shoes ruined. And then a young woman approached. Simple cotton dress, hair plastered to her forehead. She didn't know me, didn't ask for anything. She held out her umbrella, pressed it into my hand, and said, You look like you need it more than me. I had refused, pride stiff in my throat. She insisted. Then she called her fiancé, asked him to come with his car, and personally drove me to my building. She never once hinted at who I was, never asked for favors, never even gave her name. I found out later, through a mutual acquaintance, that her name was Nora Vale, that she worked as a nurse, that she was engaged, planning a modest wedding. And that wedding had been happening the very same night as Drew's, just 2 streets over. I had walked toward it with the box in my hand, and when Nora saw me, recognized me, thanked me for something I had created years earlier, I realized something profound. Kindness deserves capital more than cruelty deserves forgiveness. Back in my car that night, the city lights sliding across the windows, I rested my hand on the box and replayed Brielle's words. Stand at the back. Ugly dress. Old face. I saw her smile when she said it. A smile not of nerves, not of accident, but of victory. She wanted me diminished, erased, humiliated in front of cameras. She succeeded for a moment. But she failed to calculate what happens when you humiliate a woman who owns the very pen that can erase your empire. Because inside that box was not just real estate, not just luxury. It was proof. Proof that Cartwright Holdings was a house of cards propped up by my money, my contracts, my patience. Proof that I could, with one signature, call their debts and strip their illusions. And I intended to. I once heard a line in a courtroom. The law is not about fairness. It is about enforcement. The same is true of family. I had tried fairness. I had tried generosity. But enforcement, that was the language Brielle understood least and would learn the hardest. So I sat in the back of that car, rain-dappled glass catching the glow of neon signs, and made my decision. The box would stay with Nora. The empire would fall with Brielle. And when the calls began, when the begging, the bargaining, the endless ringing of phones began, I would not answer. Because my revenge was not going to be loud. It was going to be silent, surgical, and signed. By the time we pulled into the driveway of my townhouse, I was calm, serene even. I carried the box inside, dried it carefully, and added one final note to the envelope before returning it to Nora the next morning. When someone shows you who they are, believe them. When someone shows you kindness, remember them. May this gift be the beginning of a life built on gratitude, not arrogance. Then I poured myself a glass of wine, opened my laptop, and drafted the notices that would turn Cartwright Holdings to ash. Because revenge, like real estate, is about location. And I had the high ground. Numbers have always been my sanctuary. Other people run to faith, or wine, or the arms of strangers when they are betrayed. I run to ledgers. I run to clauses and contracts and the kind of numbers that never lie. The morning after the wedding, I woke before dawn, unable to sleep. I sat in my study, a glass-walled room lined with shelves of leather-bound ledgers and black-spined law reports. Outside, Park Avenue was still drowsy, traffic only beginning to hum. Inside, I spread the documents of Cartwright Holdings across my desk. The file had been sitting there for months, untouched, like a loaded pistol I never planned to fire. Until Brielle gave me a reason. Cartwright Holdings was, to the world, a dynasty. They had photographs in glossy magazines, Brielle posing with her mother at charity galas, her father in tailored suits breaking ground with a silver shovel, Drew now tucked neatly on her arm like the final accessory. But I had seen the ledgers, and the truth was ugly. The family was drowning in overleverage. They had too many irons in too few fires. Buildings half completed, investors restless, banks circling like vultures. Their debt service coverage ratio hovered at 1.05, essentially a corpse propped upright with makeup. Their interest coverage was even worse, disguised by accounting tricks so amateur I almost pitied them. Almost. I had kept them alive.
Me.
3 years earlier, they came begging for liquidity, and I, in one of my more foolish moments of mercy, agreed. But I didn't give them cash the way a philanthropist gives alms. No, I structured the deal like a surgeon setting bones. Every clause a stitch. Every signature a suture. $35 million revolving bridge line, callable in 30 days if covenant slipped. $18 million in preferred equity, my distributions ahead of theirs, my vote triggered in default. Vendor financing on 2 key parcels, lien secured by my REIT affiliate. Master lease on their flagship tower, signed by my firm, but with a keyman clause and a reputation clause. I had written those clauses myself, late one night, Montblanc pen scratching over the fine print while Manhattan slept. They thought me generous. They called me family. They sent me Christmas baskets. They never realized they had built their empire on paper I controlled. As I reread the contracts, I thought about the box I had taken from the wedding gift table. It had been more than a present. It had been an anchor, a chance for Brielle to tether herself to something real. The Carmel cottage, the Austin parcels, the Range Rover. Proof that even if she disliked me, I had intended to give her security. Instead, she had laughed at my ugly dress. She had spat old face in front of cameras. She thought she had banished me to the back of a photo. What she didn't realize was that I held the negatives. I pour myself coffee, black, no sugar, and outline my campaign. 1. Mac notice. Material adverse change. Triggered by reputational risk. Brielle's family had been photographed in compromising circumstances before, tax questions, delayed projects, whispers of unpaid vendors. A few quiet leaks, and I had grounds. 2. Acceleration. Vendor notes called in. They didn't have the liquidity to cover even one payment if I demanded it. 3. Termination. The master lease on their showrooms. Without the staged apartments and glossy towers filled with fake tenants, their sales machine would collapse. 4. Audit alert. Notify auditors of their revised cash position. Not a smear campaign, not illegal. Just honesty, which for them would be fatal. 5. Preferred exit. Quietly sell my preferred equity position into an escrow fund. The money would be untouchable, frozen pending audit. Dominoes, lined up neatly. The flick of my pen would set them tumbling. I sat back and looked at a framed photo on my desk. Drew, age 10, holding a hammer, beaming at me after we built a treehouse together. His curls wild, his hands covered in splinters. He had looked up at me then, as if I could build anything, fix anything. And now, here I was preparing to shatter the foundation beneath his wife's family. Would he see it as betrayal? Would he hate me for it? I closed my eyes and replayed Brielle's voice in my head. Stand at the back. Ugly dress. Old face.
No.
This wasn't betrayal. This was protection. She had tried to humiliate me, and in doing so she had revealed her nature. And if she was cruel to me, what would she be to him in private? This wasn't about vengeance alone. It was about making sure Drew saw the truth. I laid my Montblanc across the papers like a general laying a sword across a map. Each clause was a landmine. Each contract, a trench. Each covenant, a choke point. I would not fire a bullet. I would not light a match. I would simply stop holding them up. And gravity would do the rest. My phone buzzed.
Drew.
I didn't answer. I let it ring until it stopped, then played the voicemail. Mom, hey, I just wanted to say, thank you. Brielle's still asleep. Yesterday was a lot. I know she can be sharp sometimes, but she really does care. I'll call later, okay? Love you. His voice cracked on love you. For a moment, my pen stilled, but then I looked at the numbers again.
Cold. Precise.
Unforgiving. And I reminded myself, love does not erase cruelty. Contracts don't lie. And tomorrow neither would I. Revenge is often painted as fire. Burning, consuming, indiscriminate. But fire is sloppy. Revenge, when done properly, is water. Patient. Inevitable. Water does not roar. It drips. It erodes. It undermines until the mountain itself collapses under its own arrogance. And as I signed the first draft of my Mac notice, I felt no flames in me. Only water. Cold, steady, unstoppable. If Brielle's wedding had been a performance staged for glossy magazines, brittle smiles, forced laughter, every move choreographed for optics, then Nora's wedding was its opposite. It was messy, joyful,
Real.
and it was the place where I finally put the box down where it belonged. I hadn't planned to go back the next day. I had intended to file my notices, meet with my attorneys, and begin the slow, legal strangulation of Cartwright Holdings. But something gnawed at me, an unfinished thread. So, I returned to that street. 2 blocks over from Brielle's cathedral-like venue, a small church stood with white clapboard siding and a lawn dotted with folding chairs. It didn't look like the kind of place power gathered. It looked like the kind of place love gathered. And that difference mattered. I arrived in a simple black dress, pearls again at my throat, carrying the white lacquered box in my arms. It felt heavier than the day before. Heavier with decision. Heavier with consequence. The air was filled with violin music and children's laughter. Couples twirled on the lawn. A line of picnic tables overflowed with potluck casseroles beside champagne flutes. The scent of roses and roasted chicken mingled in the spring breeze. For the first time in years, I walked into a wedding and felt welcome. Nora saw me almost immediately. She gasped, bouquet still clutched in her hands, and hurried toward me, her veil slipping slightly off her bun. "You're Mrs. Ashford," she breathed. "You really came?" There was awe in her voice, but not the brittle awe of social climbers like Brielle. This was gratitude.
Genuine.
Her groom, Eli, followed quickly, shaking my hand so firmly I almost laughed. "You don't know us, but you saved her aunt's house. The rent-to-own program? Without it, she would have lost everything." I blinked. That program had been one of 100 initiatives I'd spearheaded at Crown and Calder, one of the few things I'd done not for profit, but for principle. And here, in this yard with folding chairs and sparklers, it meant more than any trophy deal in Manhattan. Nora squeezed my hands. "Please sit. Your family here." Family. A word Brielle had wielded like a weapon yesterday. Here it was a gift. They gave me the front row seat, though I insisted I hadn't come to interrupt. Someone fetched me lemonade in a tall glass, cold and tart. Children danced barefoot in the grass, giggling as they trailed bubbles through the air. Guests leaned in to thank me, to share how my programs or properties had touched their lives indirectly. I had walked into Brielle's wedding as an inconvenience. Here I was treated like royalty, not because of my money, because of my impact. And it struck me like a revelation. Legacy is not built on who fears you. It's built on who remembers your kindness. During the toasts, I rose quietly and carried the box to the gift table. The table was humble, wrapped packages from Target, envelopes with handwritten notes, mason jars filled with dollar bills for their honeymoon. My lacquered box gleamed against them like ivory among pebbles. I set it down gently, then opened it one last time. Inside lay the deeds, the car title, the Austin parcels, the envelope with the sealed dossier of Cartwright Holdings' vulnerabilities. And now a new note in my own hand. On a rainy night, you offered me shelter when I had none. Today, I offer you a home, a car and land, shelter for generations. Kindness earns compound interest. Consider this your dividend. I tucked the note inside, smoothed the ribbon, and stepped back. It happened sooner than I expected. Nora's bridesmaids, helping her sort through gifts, lifted the lid. Her gasps silenced the chatter. She pulled out the first deed, the Carmel cottage, photographs clipped to the title. Her hand flew to her mouth. Then the car title. Then the Austin parcels. Her voice broke as she read aloud the note I'd left. The crowd erupted. Applause thundered. Whistles cut the air. Glasses clinked. Children clapped without understanding. Eli kissed her forehead, stunned, tears streaming down his cheeks. And then the guests began chanting my name.
Sloan. Sloan.
Sloan. I raised my hand once, modestly, then lowered it. I had not come for recognition. I had come to redirect destiny. But the recognition tasted sweet all the same. I wasn't blind to the irony. Brielle and Nora had grown up in the same circles. Brielle, the heiress with designer dresses before she could spell Dior. Nora, the nurse's daughter who worked double shifts to cover tuition. They had competed in school pageants, debated in the same student clubs. Brielle had mocked her mercilessly, called her charity case, ragdoll, rain girl. And now, on the same weekend, one bride had lost her fortune with a careless insult. The other had gained it because of a kindness offered in a storm. It wasn't just justice. It was poetry. As the sun dipped and sparklers lit the air, I slipped away. Nora tried to stop me, tears shining in her eyes. Stay, she begged. Dance with us. You're part of this. I kissed her cheek. Build well, I whispered, because I knew staying too long would turn generosity into spectacle, and revenge, even when redirected as reward, must remain dignified. I walked back to my car, heels clicking against the pavement, and slid into the leather seat. The box was no longer in my possession, but its contents had already rewritten 2 lives. I checked my watch. 8:55 p.m. From the back seat, I opened my tablet. The Mac notice was already drafted. I read it one last time, savoring the precision of its language. Not a word of malice, only fact. Material adverse change. Covenant drift. Reputation clause invoked. At 9:10 p.m., my counsel served it electronically. At 9:32 p.m., the master lease termination was filed. At 10:05 p.m., vendor acceleration went out. At 10:44 p.m., auditors were notified. By 11:15 p.m., the avalanche had begun. As my car turned onto Park Avenue, I lowered the window. Faintly, from 2 streets away, I could still hear Nora's reception. Music, laughter, sparklers fizzing. I imagined Brielle and Drew boarding their honeymoon flight, oblivious, posting photos of champagne flutes clinking. 2 brides. 2 boxes. 2 fates sealed on one night. Brielle had thought she erased me from her photographs. What she didn't know was that I had placed her entire family in a different kind of frame, a financial one, carved in ink and iron. And soon, when the calls began, when the credit lines snapped shut, when the family business collapsed into dust, she would understand the price of arrogance. Because revenge doesn't always roar. Sometimes it smiles, sets down a box, and leaves quietly through the side door. Morning came with the sound of silence, but it was not the comforting silence of peace. It was the loaded silence of a city waiting for news. I woke just after 6, sunlight streaking across the bedroom wall, the faint murmur of traffic rising from Park Avenue. I slipped into my robe, brewed coffee, and sat in the breakfast nook with my phone face down beside me.
I didn't need to check it yet.
I knew what I would find. Missed calls, frantic texts, voicemails stacking one on top of the other. The avalanche I had set in motion was already rolling, and I had no desire to watch it crush them in real time. Avalanches don't need supervision. I took my time, sipping coffee, slicing an orange, opening the paper. Not the digital feed, the actual paper, folded and creased by the doorman downstairs. It was a habit from an earlier era, one that grounded me. My eyes skimmed the headlines about international markets, political scuffles, the usual noise. What mattered wasn't there yet. It would be by the afternoon. When I finally turned the phone over, it lit up instantly, vibrating like a trapped animal. 12 missed calls from Drew between midnight and dawn. 5 from Charles Cartwright, 1 from Brielle, and 2 from unknown numbers I recognized as lawyers. My voicemail icon glowed red. 93 messages. I listened to the first few. Drew's voice, frantic, pleading. Mom, what's happening? Brielle's dad says you pulled financing, that the banks are freezing accounts. Please tell me this isn't true. His tone shifted with each call, from confusion, to anger, to desperation. Charles's messages were shorter, clipped, furious. This is outrageous. You have no grounds. Call me back immediately, or we will sue. Brielle's was the most predictable, a shrill voice dripping venom. I always knew you hated me. You've ruined us out of jealousy. But you can't destroy me. Everyone will know what you've done. Everyone already did. At 8 o'clock, my phone buzzed again. This time it wasn't family. It was my banker contact, a man who had once sat across from me over martinis while we carved up midtown deals like surgeons. His voice was calm, but the undertone was electric. Sloan, he said, the Cartwright credit facilities have been frozen. Audit reports flagged them at 7 a.m. Vendors are filing liens already.
And he paused.
The Journal called me. They're chasing the story. Word is you pulled out. Want to give them a statement. I declined. The beauty of revenge lies in restraint. Let the numbers speak. Let the silence hang. By 9, the press had it. Major developer faces liquidity crisis after key investor exit. The headline was clinical, but the subtext was poison. It confirmed what I wanted whispered in every corner office, that Cartwright Holdings wasn't just weakened, it was radioactive. Analysts quoted anonymously. Over-reliance on a single investor. Fragile capital structure exposed. Confidence shaken. Confidence in finance is oxygen. Once gone, suffocation is immediate. By 10, the panic had spread to the ground level. Subcontractors who hadn't been paid in weeks flooded social media with angry posts. A photo of a half-built tower went viral, captioned, Cartwright Dreams, Cartwright Debt. Hashtags multiplied. Competitors circled, brokers whispered, and junior employees began calling recruiters. In real estate, collapse moves faster than construction. And still my phone rang. Drew again. I ignored it until the 13th call, then finally picked up, not out of compassion but strategy. I wanted to hear his voice when the cracks turned to craters. Mom, he was breathless, like he'd been running. You have to stop this.
Please.
Brielle's crying. Dad's losing his mind. The office is chaos. They say you triggered it. Tell me you didn't. I didn't trigger anything, I said evenly, stirring my coffee. I simply stopped holding them up. Stop holding, his voice broke. Mom, people's jobs are on the line. Do you understand? You're punishing me, punishing all of us, because Brielle said something stupid at the wedding. I let the silence hang before answering. Your wife didn't just say something stupid, Drew. She revealed exactly who she is. And I will not bankroll arrogance and cruelty. He exhaled sharply, the sound of someone trying to hold back anger. You're destroying my marriage. No, I said softly but firmly. I'm revealing what your marriage was built on. There's a difference. He hung up without a word. I finished my coffee. By noon, reporters had set up outside Cartwright headquarters, cameras flashing as employees scurried in and out, avoiding questions. A leaked internal email made its way online, detailing the acceleration notices, the frozen equity, and the termination of showrooms. Someone had forwarded it to a journalist, and within minutes, it was everywhere. Cartwright Holdings on the verge of insolvency. Charles tried calling again. I didn't pick up. His lawyers sent a letter, blustering about wrongful termination and bad faith. My attorneys laughed, then filed the letter neatly away. Every clause I had invoked was airtight. They knew it. They would bluster until they realized how useless it was. At 2, the journal published a follow-up. This one had photographs. Drew and Brielle at JFK Airport, returning early from their honeymoon, faces pale, surrounded by reporters shouting questions. Brielle wore sunglasses, her mouth twisted in irritation, not fear. Drew looked broken. The avalanche was no longer silent. It was roaring, carrying them downhill, while I stood at the summit watching. By evening, my phone had stopped vibrating. Silence again, but this time it wasn't anticipation. It was exhaustion. They had realized I would not answer. They had realized the avalanche could not be stopped. And they had realized that the woman they had tried to humiliate at a wedding photograph had more power with a pen than they had with all their family wealth. I sat in my study, lights low, watching the city settle into dusk. The papers on my desk were tidy again, contracts stacked, pens capped. The work was done. Gravity was doing the rest. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to smile. Not the brittle smile I'd worn at the wedding, not the polite smile at Nora's reception, but a real smile. A quiet acknowledgement that revenge had been achieved not through screaming or spectacle, but through precision. The Cartwrights had built an empire of glass. All I had done was withdraw my hand. And now the shards were falling one by one, slicing their reputation to ribbons. The avalanche had begun. And I had never once raised my voice. They thought distance would protect them. They thought running off to Cabo San Lucas, drinking champagne in private cabanas, and posting smiling photographs to Instagram would insulate them from the avalanche that had begun back in New York. But avalanches do not respect geography. They follow you. They bury you wherever you stand. By the time their plane touched down in Mexico, the MAC notices were already circulating among lawyers, the vendor acceleration notices were stacked on desks, and Cartwright Holdings auditors were on emergency calls with banks. Drew and Brielle had smiled for cameras at JFK, boarding their flight in matching linen outfits, blissfully unaware. By the time they checked into their oceanfront suite, the first headlines were online. Cartwright Holdings faces liquidity review after key investor exit. The wording was polite, but anyone in the industry could read between the lines. I didn't follow the updates minute by minute. That kind of obsession would have felt beneath me. Instead, I went about my routine. Breakfast at 8, a meeting with my assistant at 10, a call with Crown and Calder's board at 11. They all knew, of course, though no one said it outright. My presence alone was confirmation. I spoke crisply, clinically, making no reference to Cartwright. That was the point. To treat their collapse as so trivial it didn't warrant comment. Meanwhile, in Cabo, Brielle was ordering lobster tails and rows by the pool, her phone buzzing with notifications she silenced with a swipe of manicured nails. She had posted a photo at noon, her hand clutching a champagne glass, the ocean behind her, captioned, "Mrs. Cartwright forever." The comments were not what she expected. "Is it true about your family? Your father's company is collapsing. Why are you in Cabo? Enjoy the honeymoon while you can, sweetheart. The money's gone." Within hours, she turned off the ability to comment. But the screenshots had already spread. By that evening, Drew called me again. I picked up this time, not out of mercy, but curiosity. I wanted to hear the desperation sharpen. "Mom." His voice was strained, the background noisy, with resort music. "I don't know what's happening, but everyone's saying you pulled out, that you tanked the company. Dad says you blindsided him. Why would you do this?" I let him speak, sipping tea on my balcony. "Drew, nothing has happened that wasn't inevitable. I simply refuse to underwrite it any longer." "You refused?" His voice cracked. "Mom, Brielle's crying in the bathroom. The press is calling her phone nonstop. They're saying we could lose the house. Do you know what that's doing to her?" "She'll survive," I said coolly. "She has a talent for survival when others do the labor." Perhaps now she'll learn what it feels like when the ground shifts beneath her feet. God, Mom. His words tumbled, panicked. You're punishing me, too. Do you even realize that? I married her. She's my wife. Don't you care what happens to me? That struck a chord. I closed my eyes, imagined him at 6 years old, curls bouncing as he ran to show me a crayon drawing of a house with our names on it. He had looked at me with such trust then. Now his voice was tight with betrayal. I care, I said slowly. But love doesn't mean enabling. You walked her down that aisle knowing what kind of woman she was. I saw it in her eyes the first night you introduced her. Ambition without gratitude. You thought you could change her. You can't. And I won't. He was silent for a long moment. Then he whispered, You've destroyed me, and hung up. I stared at the phone for a while, then set it aside. He was wrong. I hadn't destroyed him. I had given him a chance to see clearly. Whether he chose to or not was his burden to carry. While Drew flailed in Cabo, New York was on fire. Reporters camped outside Cartwright Holdings headquarters, cameras snapping every time an employee entered or exited. Photos of staff carrying boxes of files were splashed across the news with captions like Exodus at Cartwright. Vendors filed liens. Unions threatened strikes. Employees who had spent years parroting loyalty to Charles Cartwright were suddenly updating their resumes. The edifice was crumbling, stone by stone. The Journal ran a second piece. This one quoted anonymous insiders, describing the company as a house of cards long dependent on one investor's patience. Everyone knew who that investor was. They didn't name me, but they didn't need to. My silence was its own headline. And while the avalanche rolled, Brielle posed for staged honeymoon photos, her smile frozen, her eyes darting off camera. On their second night, she tried to reserve a private yacht for a sunset cruise. The resort concierge politely informed her the credit card on file had been declined. She produced another. Declined. She snapped at the staff, her voice sharp enough to draw attention from nearby guests. Do you know who I am? She hissed.
I'm Brielle Cartwright.
This is temporary. My father. Her father, at that very moment, was in a midtown office being grilled by bankers demanding collateral he could not produce.
Drew tried his own card.
Declined again. The concierge's smile was fixed, rehearsed. Perhaps you'd prefer a smaller package, sir? They slunk back to their cabana, humiliated, the whispers of other guests following them like smoke. The following morning, paparazzi found them. Photos splashed across the tabloids. Brielle shielding her face with a sun hat, Drew looking exhausted, his shirt wrinkled. Headlines were merciless. Honeymoon in crisis. Cartwright era spotted as family business collapses. I read the articles at my breakfast table, the photographs crisp on newsprint, and felt nothing but cold satisfaction. Brielle had wanted me pushed to the back of the wedding photos, erased from the narrative. Now it was her face, front and center, humiliated on every front page. Drew called again that evening. His tone was different this time, low and raw.
Mom, please.
If there's anything you can do, at least for me. I don't care about her, about the company, but this is my life. Everything's falling apart. I let his words hang in the air, then replied softly, No, Drew. This was never your life. It was theirs. You just stepped into it. Maybe now you'll remember who you are without their name propping you up. You don't understand, he whispered. We'll have nothing. I smiled faintly. Then you'll finally know what it means to build something yourself. He didn't answer, and for the first time, he didn't leave a voicemail when he hung up. By the time their honeymoon ended, the Cartwright name was synonymous with failure. Banks had pulled credit, lawsuits were pending, and their glossy midtown office was half empty. Employees described the mood as funeral-like. The press used words like implosion and collapse. Employees described the mood as funeral-like. The press used words like implosion and collapse. Brielle returned to New York with her sunglasses and brittle smile, pretending nothing was wrong, but the paparazzi caught her yelling at a driver when he used the wrong car door. Drew trailed behind her, face pale, avoiding eye contact with cameras. The avalanche had followed them across oceans and into airports, crushing them with each step. And through it all, I remained silent. I didn't gloat publicly, didn't grant interviews, didn't so much as raise my voice. Silence was louder than any declaration. I had been told to stand at the back. Now Brielle stood at the center of humiliation, and I wasn't even in the picture. By the time Brielle and Drew's honeymoon ended, New York was already writing their obituary. The Cartwright offices, once buzzing with assistants ferrying lattes and glossy brochures, now looked like a crime scene. Employees carrying boxes of files under the flashes of cameras, security guards turning away shouting contractors, lawyers ducking their heads to avoid microphones. I read the first lawsuits before lunch that Monday. A group of unpaid subcontractors had filed liens, followed by a union demanding emergency arbitration. Then a smaller creditor, emboldened, petitioned for accelerated repayment. Within 24 hours, Cartwright Holdings was facing a dozen separate claims. It was a feeding frenzy. One shark draws blood. The rest follow. I didn't gloat. Gloating is for amateurs. I simply folded the articles, placed them in a leather file, and turned to more pressing matters. The true spectacle was not in the lawsuits. It was in their desperate attempt to manage the story. 3 days after returning from Cabo, Brielle arranged a press conference in front of their tower downtown. She arrived in a cream pantsuit, oversized sunglasses perched on her face, every gesture rehearsed. Drew stood behind her, pale, his jaw tight, his hands clasped in front of him like a penitent child. Cameras rolled. Reporters shouted questions. Brielle held up one manicured hand. "There has been a targeted, malicious campaign against my family's company," she declared, her voice dripping with defiance. "Certain investors have acted in bad faith, exploiting minor contractual clauses to sabotage us. But make no mistake, we will recover. Cartwright Holdings is bigger than one person's vendetta." I watched the broadcast live, sipping tea in my living room. Her words were brittle. Her smile cracked around the edges. And her attempt to paint me as the villain backfired within hours. Because one of the journalists, sharp, hungry, and blessed with good sources, published the actual clause screenshots. The MAC clause. The acceleration terms. The reputation triggers. Brielle's father's signature at the bottom of every page. The article was devastating in its simplicity. They signed it. They agreed. They lost. Public opinion turned instantly. Comments flooded in online. So she's blaming the person who kept them afloat for years? Sounds like her dad was asleep at the wheel. Classic heiress meltdown. By evening, Brielle was trending, not as a victim, but as a punchline. He came to see me the next night. He didn't call ahead. He knew I wouldn't answer. Instead, he showed up at my building, waiting in the lobby like a lost boy. My doorman phoned up, his voice hesitant. "Mrs. Ashford, your son is here. Should I send him away?" "No," I said. "Let him wait." I left him there for nearly half an hour before descending. By the time I stepped into the lobby, Drew was pacing, his hair disheveled, his tie askew. He looked 10 years older than he had on his wedding day. "Mom," he started, his voice raw. "Why are you doing this? Do you hate me that much?" I tilted my head, studying him. "I don't hate you, Drew. I hate what you've become under her influence. There's a difference." He ran a hand through his hair. "You don't understand. People are losing jobs. My wife is being humiliated. Dad." I cut him off with a raised hand. "Your father-in-law signed those contracts. He knew the risks. He gambled. He lost. That isn't my fault. It's his." his eyes filled with tears, anger and grief colliding. You don't care, do you? You don't care about me, about what this does to me. I leaned closer, my voice calm, measured. I care enough to let you see the truth. Sometimes love isn't about cushioning the fall. Sometimes it's about letting the ground teach you. I handed him an envelope, not full of money, not a lifeline, but a copy of his wedding invitation. I had underlined Brielle's words from that day, written neatly in my hand. Stand at the back. Ugly dress. Old face. He stared at it, color draining from his face. Then I added a check made out directly to Cartwright employees, not to the company, not to Charles, not to Brielle. Payroll for 1 month, covered by me with the memo line, for the people who built what you took for granted. He tried to speak, but I turned and walked away, leaving him standing there with the paper trembling in his hands. While Brielle floundered in public, Nora was quietly becoming the city's new darling. Her wedding gift, my gift, had not stayed private for long. A bridesmaid's photo of me setting the lacquered box on her gift table had surfaced online. The note I'd written, thanking her for her kindness in the rain, circulated on social media. Within a week, local news outlets were covering Nora and Eli's story. The nurse who had once struggled, now blessed with a beachfront cottage, a new car, and rental properties providing steady income. Headlines gushed. Kindness rewarded. Nurse marries into fortune of gratitude. I attended the title signing quietly, slipping into the back of the attorney's office while cameras clicked outside. Nora hugged me, tears in her eyes, and the banker shook my hand with respect. I left before reporters could corner me, satisfied to watch the glow from a distance. The contrast was perfect. One bride, ridiculed for arrogance. The other, celebrated for kindness. Both stories trace back to me, though I never once gave a statement. Behind the headlines, the legal machinery churned. Cartwright's lawyers filed frantic motions, accusing me of bad faith, of sabotage, of vendetta. My attorneys countered with icy precision. Every clause, every covenant, every compliance report laid out in black and white. I hadn't bent the rules. I hadn't lied. I hadn't forced. Judges know the difference. At the same time, vendors escalated their fury. One contractor chained himself to the doors of Cartwright headquarters, holding a sign that read, "Pay us before you pay yourselves." Photos of the scene went viral. Employees began leaking memos about withheld paychecks. A class action suit loomed. The empire was not just crumbling financially. It was rotting morally in the public eye. Reputation, I have learned, is more fragile than glass. It doesn't shatter once. It cracks slowly, splinters spreading until the whole surface collapses. Brielle thought she could control the story with a pantsuit and a microphone. What she never understood was that truth, once exposed, needs no press conference. And Drew, my son, thought he could sway me with tears, with appeals to love. But love without accountability is weakness. I didn't raise him to be weak. I rewarded kindness in public so the world would remember it exists. I punished cruelty in private so they would never enjoy the spectacle. The Cartwrights had mistaken me for a pawn in their game. They had forgotten that I was the one holding the board. The first whisper of the auction reached me through a discreet email from one of my banking contacts. Subject line: Cartwright Asset Liquidation. I opened it over breakfast, unfolding the PDF with the neat precision of someone who has seen 100 such notices in her life. It was a list of everything they once flaunted as untouchable. Antique cars, original artwork, designer furniture hauled from penthouses. Even the piano Brielle had insisted on importing from Italy, lacquered black and barely played. The kind of items meant to symbolize permanence, now reduced to lot numbers in a clearance catalog. I printed the document, smoothed it flat on the table, and studied it as if it were scripture. This was more than financial ruin. This was spectacle. Auction houses are not discreet funerals. They are public executions. Wealth paraded, tagged, bid upon, and carried away by strangers. The sale was scheduled for Friday, open to registered bidders. I reserved my proxies quietly, 3 different buyers with no obvious connection to me. They would carry my paddle, raise my numbers, and retrieve what I wanted. Because revenge, to be satisfying, requires not only collapse but reclamation. Friday came gray and wet, the kind of rain that slicks marble steps and makes umbrellas bloom like dark flowers outside city buildings. I arrived unannounced, a dark coat draped over my shoulders, and slipped into the back of the auction hall. My proxies were already seated in different sections, their paddles resting on their laps. The room hummed with the low energy of vultures waiting to feast. Wealthy collectors, opportunistic brokers, a handful of rivals who couldn't resist the theater of seeing Cartwright dignity stripped and sold. At the front, the auctioneer stood beneath bright lights, voice sharp as a whip. Behind him, slides projected each item as it was presented. Lot 1, he began. A 2019 Rolls-Royce Phantom, formerly owned by the Cartwright family. Opening bid, $150,000. Hands rose. Paddles flashed. The car sold in under 2 minutes, half its value gone with the bang of a gavel. Applause murmured, not of admiration, but of schadenfreude. I watched silently, my proxies taking notes. Lot by lot, their lives were dismantled. Brielle's designer gowns, once paraded at charity galas, sold for pennies on the dollar. Charles's watch collection, each piece engraved, scattered to buyers who would never think of him again. The black lacquered piano found a new owner within minutes. By the time Lot 42 arrived, I lifted a finger, signaling my first proxy. It was a Chagall painting that had hung in their dining room, a piece I had once admired over champagne while Brielle prattled about its color story. My proxy bid, without hesitation. Competitors faltered. The gavel fell. Mine. The room didn't know it, but I was reclaiming their history piece by piece. The true sting of an auction isn't losing the object. It's watching strangers place numbers on your memories. The Cartwrights were there, of course. They had no choice. They sat near the front, stiff-backed, their lawyers whispering, their faces pale. Charles looked like a deflated balloon, eyes sunken, his jaw slack with disbelief. Brielle wore another cream pantsuit, her armor against humiliation, though the tremor in her hands betrayed her. Drew sat beside her, his head lowered, not even trying to hide the shame. When the auctioneer introduced their art collection as a liquidation necessitated by current circumstances, a ripple of laughter broke out in the room. Brielle's face froze. Charles clenched his fists. Drew winced. And I sat at the back, unseen, sipping water, savoring every second. The climax came with the listing of their show home, the Midtown penthouse staged for buyers and parties. Once their crown jewel, now stripped of tenants, its value gutted by scandal. Lot 87, the auctioneer called. Cartwright Holdings show property. Opening bid, $2 million. Hands shot up. Numbers climbed. My second proxy joined at $3 million, deliberate, unhurried. At 3.8, competitors dropped away. The gavel fell. Mine again. I didn't smile. Smiling was unnecessary. The victory was in the silence of Brielle's gasp, the slump of Charles's shoulders, the way Drew didn't even lift his head. The property they had once paraded as proof of their empire now belonged to me, through a proxy they would never trace. But ownership was never the point. It was what I did with it afterward. The Chagall I donated to a women's shelter, where it now hangs in a common room, bringing color to the lives of women rebuilding themselves from ruin. Brielle had once bragged about it to bankers. Now it is admired by survivors who don't even know her name. The black piano I gifted to a public school's music program, where children with calloused fingers and bright eyes play on it daily. The Rolls-Royce, purchased by one of my proxies, I sold to Nora for $1. She tried to insist on paying more. I accepted 10. She drove it away herself, her laughter echoing down the block. And the Midtown show home? That I kept. Not to live in, not to flaunt. I converted it into transitional housing for single mothers finishing degrees. A press release announced the opening. A space for women to rise, funded by private philanthropy. My name was not attached, but theirs was erased. A week later, Drew tried one last time. He came to my townhouse at dusk, pale and drawn, eyes hollow. He didn't knock loudly, just stood at the door until I answered.
Why?
His voice cracked. Why couldn't you let it go? You've destroyed everything. I regarded him evenly. I didn't destroy anything. I enforced contracts. Your father-in-law signed them. Your wife mocked me. I simply allowed consequences to arrive. He swallowed hard. You could have stopped it. I shook my head.
No.
Stopping it would have been weakness. And I don't traffic in weakness. He blinked, tears threatening. I don't even know who you are anymore. I leaned closer, my voice quiet. No, Drew. You don't know who you are anymore. And until you do, you'll never understand me. I closed the door gently, leaving him in the hall. Auction rooms are theaters of humiliation. They don't just strip assets. They strip illusions. For years, the Cartwrights believed wealth meant permanence. That marble floors and imported chandeliers could hold back tides. They forgot that true wealth is leverage, contracts, timing. They forgot that permanence belongs only to those who understand the rules. I understood. I always have. I had been told to stand at the back of the wedding photographs, so I wouldn't ruin the picture. Now I stood at the back of an auction hall, unseen, while the picture of their lives was torn into pieces and sold to the highest bidder. And when the gavel fell for the final time, I walked out into the rain, my coat pulled tight, my proxies trailing with paperwork, and I felt nothing but clarity. Mercy belongs to the innocent. Accountability belongs to the guilty. And the Cartwrights were guilty of arrogance. The city never stops moving, even when empires fall. Trucks still rumbled down Fifth Avenue. Brokers still shouted into phones. Mothers still rushed their children across crosswalks with juice boxes, spilling in backpacks. The collapse of the Cartwrights had sent ripples through Manhattan's real estate world. Yes, but only ripples. The tide continued, indifferent. And that was the cruelest truth for them. They had once believed themselves indispensable, their name etched into the skyline. Now they were simply one more cautionary tale, their ruin noted in boardrooms with a shrug before attention turned to the next deal. For me, it was different. For me, the ending was personal. I didn't need their destruction for survival. I had survived long before their name meant anything to me. But I needed it for clarity. For the lesson. For the satisfaction of knowing that when someone tries to erase me from a picture, I will redraw the entire frame. The first time I visited Nora and Eli after their honeymoon, the cottage was already blooming into life. The Carmel property had always been one of my favorites, a white stucco jewel perched above the Pacific, vines curling along the stone, the sea air clean and unpretentious. It had been mine for years, but I had always kept it vacant, waiting for the right moment to decide its fate. Now it belonged to them. I arrived without fanfare, no driver, just myself in a linen dress and a silk scarf. Nora greeted me at the gate, her eyes still wide with the disbelief of a woman who had been given something she never imagined possible. Eli carried boxes inside, laughing, the sound of a man who felt the ground secure beneath his feet for the first time in his life. Mrs. Ashford, Nora said, hugging me tightly. We don't know how to thank you. You already have, I replied. On a rainy night when you gave me an umbrella. gratitude doesn't always come in the form of a check. Sometimes it comes in the form of a reminder that kindness still exists. We walked through the house together, her voice trembling with awe as she described how she planned to turn one room into a nursery, another into a library. I watched her touch the walls gently, reverently, as though she were thanking the house itself. And in that moment, I knew I had chosen correctly. My wealth, redirected, had fertilized something alive instead of propping up arrogance. Weeks later, at Crown and Calder's quarterly strategy meeting, I presented the case not as a vendetta, but as a lesson. The room was full of men in tailored suits, their watches gleaming, their pens tapping nervously on notepads. They knew what had happened. They had whispered about it in private dinners, speculated about my motives. Now I gave them the version that mattered. I projected charts on the wall. Debt ratios. Compliance triggers. Bridge line overextensions. I spoke clinically, dissecting Cartwright Holdings as if it were a cadaver on a slab. This, I concluded, pointing to the final slide, is why you never build an empire on a single source of liquidity you don't control. Diversification is not theory. It is survival. No one asked me about Brielle. No one asked me about Drew. They all knew better. They took notes. They nodded. They left the room understanding that in our world, strength belongs not to those who strut, but to those who write the clauses. A month after the auction, Drew sent me a letter through a mutual friend. A thick envelope, my name scrawled on the front in his familiar handwriting. I held it in my hands for a long time, feeling the weight of it, the ghost of my little boy who once left me drawings folded the same way. I didn't open it. Instead, I fed it slowly into the shredder, the sound of paper tearing filling the silence of my study. Strip by strip, his words dissolved into nothing. Not because I didn't love him, but because love does not mean surrender. He had chosen his life. He had chosen his bride. And choices have consequences. I will not save him from them. The Midtown show home I had reclaimed at auction opened quietly 6 months later. The press release was small, tucked into the corner of the Times, but the work was loud. The penthouse once staged with imported Italian sofas and champagne towers was now a transitional housing center for single mothers finishing degrees. I attended the opening in person, standing among women clutching toddlers, their eyes wide with hope. The rooms that once echoed with hollow luxury now rang with laughter, with the sound of pencils scratching on homework, with lullabies sung softly against the hum of city traffic. I attended the opening in person, standing among women clutching toddlers, their eyes wide with hope. The rooms that once echoed with hollow luxury now rang with laughter, with the sound of pencils scratching on homework, with lullabies sung softly against the hum of city traffic. One woman, no older than Brielle, hugged me so hard I almost lost my breath. "I didn't think people like you saw us," she whispered. I smiled faintly. "People like me don't need to be seen. We need to see." And I knew that if Brielle ever saw the photographs, the show home she once paraded through, now occupied by women she would have sneered at, it would sting more than any lawsuit. By then, the calls had stopped. The lawsuits had either been dismissed or settled for pennies. The Cartwright name no longer carried weight in real estate circles. Their offices had been vacated, their tower renamed under a new developer. Brielle still tried to maintain a social presence, posting filtered photos from second-tier galas, but the comments were merciless. She had become a cautionary meme, the kind of heiress people whispered about with pity disguised as mockery. Drew faded with her, his once bright eyes dulled, his career prospects shriveled by association. They lived in a smaller apartment uptown, stripped of the trappings they once wore like armor. I drove past once, late at night, saw the lights on in their window, 2 silhouettes moving inside. I felt nothing. No triumph, no grief. Just clarity. The silence between us had become permanent. And silence, I realized, is the sharpest blade of all. One evening, I poured myself a glass of wine and stood at my window, looking out over the city. Lights stretched endlessly, each one a story, a life, a secret. Somewhere in that grid, the Cartwrights sat licking their wounds. Somewhere else, Nora and Eli raised a toast in the Carmel cottage, their future secured. And here I stood, not at the back of anyone's photo, but exactly where I chose to be, alone, unbowed, in control. I thought back to that day at the wedding, the sting of Brielle's voice as she hissed at me to stand at the back. The humiliation had lasted seconds. The consequences had lasted forever. At the wedding, I had been erased from a picture. But in the end, I had redrawn the entire composition. And this time, my smile was real. Thank you for spending this time with us here at Her True Stories. The journey we shared today isn't just about what happened to our protagonist. It's about what can happen for you. Maybe you saw a piece of your own story in hers. Maybe you felt the sting of betrayal, the weight of loss, or the hunger for justice. Whatever part touched you most, remember this. You are stronger than your pain, and your story is still unfolding. If you want to take the next step toward writing that new chapter for yourself, don't forget to pick up a copy of our best-selling book, Reclaiming Your Peace After Pain. Inside, you'll find practical tools, heartfelt encouragement, and strategies to help you break free from what tried to destroy you. Click the link in the description box to get your copy today and begin your own journey toward healing and renewal. Before you go, we'd love to hear from you. What part of this story resonated with you the most? Hit the subscribe button and please share your thoughts in the comments below. Your words might be the encouragement another woman desperately needs tonight. And if this story spoke to your heart, be sure to like this video, subscribe to Her True Stories, and ring the bell so you never miss another episode. Because here, every story is a reminder. Pain may write a chapter, but you get to decide how the book ends.